Welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. Last month, John Comstock hosted a discussion for Discipleship Place on the role of technology in ministry. In this discussion, Bryce, Ashlin-Mayo, Elaine Briefman, Sarah Kinzer, Lindsey Murphy, and Cruz-Osorio discuss what a Christ-centric use of technology looks like.
I want to introduce to you Bryce, Ashlin-Mayo, and Bryce. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and then talk to us a little bit about theology and digital and all the things around that and help frame this discussion for us.
Hey, thanks so much, John, and it is great to meet you all. As John said, my name is Bryce Ashlin-Mayo. I am the current Dean of Theology at Ambrose University, which is the official school of the Church of the Nazarene in Canada, your neighbor to the north. And in 2 weeks, I will be the president of Ambrose University. So we're in a bit of a transition piece here with our current president retiring. And one of the things that I'm known for is one of my kind of expertise is in online ministry. Did all my doctoral work around this. And what partially gives me the credibility to do this, like many of you, is I pastored during the pandemic. I was a local church pastor for 25 years until a couple of years ago, and helped lead our church in the midst of the pandemic and all that meant. So it's great to be with you. Looking forward to sharing with you a little bit as I kind of kick off our time together, and then we'll hand over to my great colleagues who will talk about some implications of what I want to talk about this morning. So I want to begin by telling you probably a story you're somewhat familiar with, but maybe you've heard it from a bit of a different angle. We kind of jump back in the time machine 500 years. Think of the year 1519, and Cortez was entering their version of the New World. There's lots of weird language around that, but that's kind of the story. And as they kind of approached that, they recognized, this classic story goes, they approached their 600 men, and Cortez arrive, and to stop kind of everyone from going back, they burn the ships. That's the phrase, right? They burn the ships so that all of the people that have come don't have the temptation to go back. Now, this story, that's a very brief version of it, is told with tons of zeal, particularly at business conferences or places with leadership. They'll say, you just got to burn the ships. In fact, there's a worship song about this and kind of repentance and burning ships and not going back. And that's one way to frame the story, and it's very kind of appealing, but it actually isn't quite the full story, like most things, right? The story actually is that Cortez wasn't a strategic, well-placed leadership move. It was a desperation of a leader who was losing control, and all of his men were about ready to mutiny him and take it over. And so in an act of desperation, Cortez burns the ships. So Cortez wasn't burning the ships out of good leadership, but because mutiny was burning and was desperate to keep a hold of leadership. And I think in many ways, this is and has parallels to our church post-pandemic when it comes to online and digital ministry. So I think as churches and church leaders, I see so many parallels here, right? We kind of entered the COVID-19 pandemic, and many of us were forced to go online. We were, like I used to folks, of being shoved into the digital deep end. We didn't plan for it. It wasn't chosen. We were forced to adapt to Zoom and to YouTube and onboard and like live streaming, etc. And really briefly, praise God for those options. Could you imagine if this happened like in the 80s and we were all somehow walking around sharing VHS tapes like in the good old Blockbuster days with every one of what was going on, because we couldn't all gather in the same place. So praise the Lord for it. But the challenge is that we kind of have emerged now from the pandemic, and everyone is kind of suffering from a bit of digital fatigue and a little bit of even of digital disdain. And we can, in the same way, have the temptation to burn the very ships that saved us from being completely connected from community, saved us from kind of being totally isolated. And we can be tempted to, now that we've landed in a new spot, to ignore all that we learned and to ignore all of the changes and to ignore all the things that somehow helped us to get to where we are and to burn the ships. And I want to suggest this morning that we learn from what happened and that we respond accordingly. And instead of burning the ships that got us to where we are in those kind of year or two of the pandemic, we use the remnants of it to build something new. And I would articulate a phrase of building a high bridge, like building a bridge rather than just burning the ships, using the mast and the sail and the gunnels and all the different pieces of a ship to be able to build a new pathway into a future kind of recognizes part of the digital reality we're all in, but also recognizes the limitations of those realities. And how do we kind of deal with the new reality? It's somewhat digital and somewhat in person. So my suggestion, as we look at kind of a basic theology of technology and maybe some encouragements as we go into this next season, of what does it look like that we don't burn the ships? Because that would just be poor leadership and ignore all that we learned in the past. But instead, we use them to build a high bridge into our future. So I want to do that with you this morning. So here's my suggestion. I think as we look ahead, we need to kind of understand a little bit of how do we understand technology biblically and theologically. So a couple of as we look at technology, and then we'll talk about digital technology, but specifically technology. Technology can be defined, and Marshall McLuhan, the great media ecologist, would say this, that technology is anything that extends our reach. So anything that extends our reach is a form of technology. We sometimes think of technology as just whatever is new, but technology is more than simply it's new. Like the air conditioning in your car, it was technology in this time. It's kind of old now. Or the fork that you're using to eat your food, that is technology. It extends your reach, but we wouldn't use it as a form of new technology in our vocabulary today. So we have to sometimes think of technology as anything that's new, but by definition, technology is simply that anything extends our reach. But technology isn't simply anything that extends our reach. It's also, by definition, amoral. It's a tool. It's not good or bad. Some technology can give you great power and can reach great some really poor things. But technology can also be used to reach for incredibly good things. That's the case with all forms of technology. Explosion can help you build bridges and like do landscape, can also destroy lots of people. Like all of these things, rockets can be used to propel people into space for exploration and science. It also can be used to put on the head of a nuclear weapon. The technology is amoral, but that power has with it great potential and possibility and potential peril, right? It's amoral by itself. But also technology is the result. Technology is the result of being made in the image of God. The Creator creates creation and empowers humans creative, right? It's part of the nature of us as humans to use technology and create technology in all of our creativity. It's actually baked into what does it mean to be made in the image of God. But technology is also effectual. As Marshall McLuhan would say, the medium is the message. The technology, and specifically media technology, does not come without effects. It can sometimes, as we extend our reach, it can sometimes reach back and affect us. It can change us. It can kind of mold us, if you will. And technology is blinding. Sometimes we don't realize the effects of technology. As Marshall McLuhan also said, we don't know who discovered water, but we know it wasn't a fish. We're often ignorant technology has shaped us. Most of us are ignorant how print technology has shaped us, and the printed book that are behind me and that we all have in front of us, it really shaped Western civilization and made us very individualistic. It reshaped everything, and all technology has to do that. We are just usually ignorant of the technology that we're in and how it's impacting us at the time. So as I look this morning, I want to just share with us maybe an image from Scripture that I think is helpful as we think about what does it look like to bridge the online and the physical in a practical way moving forward in our ministries and our lives together. I want to do it by telling you about a tale of two boats. How Scripture teaches us about the opportunities and the dangers in our pragmatic impulses to use technology. So if you think about Scripture, so let's trace technology a little bit through Scripture, a little bit of technology 101, if you will. If you remember from Genesis chapter 1, God creates all of creation, and God creates Adam and Eve. And as Adam and Eve are in the garden, they're created in God's image. And we learn that they are given some instructions. They're given the instructions in Genesis 1:26 that they're first made in God's image, yes. And then Genesis 2:15, they're given the instructions to till, and keep, and subdue the earth, right? This is the instructions for humanity in the garden. They're called to tend for it. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but just think of your own time in the garden. How much have you spent tilling? And can you do tilling without technology, something that extends your reach? You can't just use your fingers and run through the soil and get all of the roots. Technology is a key part of what does it mean to garden. And you use a hoe or a rake or some sort of pick or axe or whatever. So I just want to acknowledge, even before the fall happens in the garden, Adam and Eve are given a mandate that would include the need to have technology, to fulfill God's command, to look and care and till the earth. This is a part of the dynamic even before the fall. And then, of course, as you know, the fall happens in Genesis chapter 3, and there's lots of technology implications of the fall. You can think of the clothing. That's all of Adam and Eve using clothing to hide in their shame. And then the first technological upgrade happens where God, uses the skin of an animal, which has some foreshadowing to it, to kind of help to clothe Adam and Eve. But if you extend a little further into Scripture, you'll see the first time that God is shown even more explicitly as a technologist. Because it doesn't take long that Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden, begin to expand, and they're fulfilling God's mission to expand the earth. And things go bad. The sin has entered the world, and it isn't good. And God has thus decided he is going to destroy the earth, keep Noah and his family, and give Noah this instruction to build this new technology, a boat, and give actually specific instructions on how to build the boat. God is actually giving instructions to a new form of technology to Noah to build this boat for like a storm that is going to come and kind of take over the earth. And God is using this new form of technology to save Noah and his family. And even after the flood that happens and Noah and his family begin to come out of the ark and into this now world that they're going to fill, God gives the very similar commandment to Adam and Eve. They're called to go and fill the earth. This is to be fruitful and multiply, to go and fill the earth. They're given the same commandment after even coming out of this boat that was given to save them and to continue on their mission. But then if you fast forward a little further in Scripture, and I know I'm just picking out pieces, and I write on this pretty extensively in terms of all the Old Testament in terms of technology. But if you just fast forward a little bit longer to Jonah, if you remember the story of Jonah, what's the first thing that Jonah does after he's called to go to the Ninevites? He gets on a ship to Tarshish. He gets on a boat to go away from God's mission. God provides a boat to Noah and his family to propel them on mission, and Jonah gets on a boat to go away from God's mission. The boat's just a form of technology. It's amoral. It can go one way or the other in terms of pursuing of God's mission. But I want you to note the nature here of even something as simple as this boat, a tale of two boats in the Old Testament, of one used to move forward in God's mission and one to move away from it. And when it comes to digital technology, that would be my encouragement to all of us to consider this. How do we use this new form of technology that does have implications and challenges, and it does shape us and transform us, and we have to be critically aware of all of that. But how do we use it to move forward on God's mission, to make disciples of all nations? How do we move it to help to love all others? And how do we use this now post-pandemic with all that we've learned from it in a way that doesn't just burn the ships and ignore all the things that we learned, but in a way that actually might be able to use the ships to build something for the future? All the good things of the pandemic and all of the things that we learned, there's limitations to technology and what it can do, and use that for the furtherance of God's mission together. So I want to make for us kind of 5 observations about the potential of a hybrid future together when it comes to ministry. How do we pursue God's mission as the church in a way that takes advantages of all of the things we've learned and the implications of digital technology while being aware of all of the challenges, and for us to embrace that future together and maybe a more of an in-person and online dynamic, both and, as opposed to just a solely either or. So the first thing I would suggest of my couple observations is, first, don't burn the ships, right? Don't give up. Remember all the things you've learned and recognize, even when it comes to digital, all of the same critiques that we make of digital ministry. And if you've all heard all these things before, right? They will make people stupid if they use the internet. They makes people more alone if they use the internet. That they can't experience community when they use the internet. All these things, all of those same critiques, and I can show you writings on that if you read some of my books. That I give examples of this. All of those same things were said during the print era when books became ubiquitous. And yet none of us, not one of us, would consider getting rid of our church libraries necessarily, or getting rid of our pastoral libraries and all the books and being a pastor without books, or getting rid of everybody's personal Bibles, an implication of this. And we would never consider that. And yet those are all told to tell people that you're going to be dumb, you'll never know the Bible anymore because you would no longer need to memorize it. And yet we would never give that up. And so what does it look like for us to recognize that even some of these critiques of digital, and how do we navigate that? So us not to burn those ships, because that will be a part of the future no matter what. And so how do we navigate a future of ministry methodology that recognizes that digital will always be a piece of that? And so how do we navigate that? So first, don't burn the ships. Second, be cautious that we don't, you don't, I don't, compare the best of in-person with the worst of all online. And you probably all experienced this, right? Somebody says, you know what, like we got to get rid of our live stream because people who are coming online, they're not experiencing community, they're not participating, they're not giving, they're just consumers. And they're comparing the best of in person with the worst of online, right? Because we all know, I was a pastor for 25 years. There's a lot of people who come after the service starts, sit in the back row, don't stand up, don't give, don't serve, all of those things in person. And they come even like most weeks. And yet they're a complete consumer, but they're coming in person. And yet there are people who are coming online that maybe are giving regularly. They're finding active ways to serve. I have a colleague who goes to a church in a different city and she serves every week in her church. They tithe to their church. They're a part of their church. They're members of their church. But it's in a different city and they attend online. So what does it look like for us to not make sure we are very cautious that we're not comparing the best of in person with the worst of our online and just somehow throwing that out as big ignorance? Because at the end of the day, the goal is the same. We want someone to be engaged in Christian community, on mission together, using their spiritual gifts, giving generously to the church, being a part of Christian community. And I think we can all agree if a person does that, at least in person or in part or in full online, that's a positive. And that actually, those things are the goal, not that we just get them in person in the building. So even as we're talking about hybrid ministry, or what does it look like to do both of these things, not seeing digital ministry as somehow just the appetizer just to get people in the building, that actually they can participate in community and give and serve in online ways. And that doesn't have to be seen as somehow less than. We want to see people engage in Christian community in its fullness. And then I would suggest as we enter into a hybrid future, we invest in it, budget for it, help people find ways to serve in the midst of it. Have your people who are joining you online find ways to serve online. Have people in the room find ways to bridge the gap between in person and online. Consider how to keep that connection going, even if it's just for the person who is traveling for work and wants to stay connected to the church, or the person who's checking your church out for the first time, or someone who is a shut-in. In fact, actually, one of the most interesting things that from the disability community post pandemic is there's a great critique from the disability community to the church post pandemic, because they said, during the pandemic, we actually could come to church. My social anxiety wasn't an issue. My mobility issue. The church became equally engaging to me. I could come no problem. And then after church. They shut the online stream down, and now I can't come anymore. I don't have those same engagements. And for us to recognize there's lots of people who the digital engagement isn't actually an exercise in equality for people to engage in different ministries, and ability for them to bridge the church in ways that didn't happen otherwise. So those are just examples of ways to invest for it and see that for all the potential it would have. And then I would just say also that we use it for community building, because I make this argument all the time that digital is less about content and more about community, right? We're really good at making content in a print culture, and that's what we did with digital. We just made content all the time. But one of the things online is actually decent about is helping people actually engage in community. Now, it looks different. People engage in community different. We could have a conversation around that. But actually, it's very good at community. And you just have to consider how romantic relationships have adjusted in 20 years. 20 years ago, if you would have told somebody, the majority of people meet their significant others online, it would be seen with like disdain, or at least a lot of just suspicion. But now that's actually the way most people experience their partner. And if you were to ask somebody if texting with somebody and you can be emotionally engaged or even have an affair online, and if you talk to a partner hey, it's online, it's not real, they'll say no, that's real, that's a real person on the other end. It's true. This is the challenge. You can actually cheat on your wife online, or your spouse online, your husband online, but you can also experience, that's the thing, there's the chance for an actual relational dynamics online, and it's the same in church. We can experience this dynamic in an online way, and I have really great friends from around the world we connect with regularly online through texting or Zoom calls or etc. Rarely see each other in person, but we're good friends. This is a reality, and it can exist for church too. So not giving up on this, and to use it for community building and all that could look like, and reaching out to others who are maybe exploring faith or have questions that to do with in person, but would feel comfortable doing it online. My encouragement to all of us is we take this for all that it could provide, that we don't burn the ships, right? We use those ships to build a bridge into the future. And my colleagues are going to talk more about how we can do this. But this is actually an example of how we can use a ship to move people away from the mission of God. And we were really good at identifying how the internet does that. But the internet also can help people move towards the mission of God, engage in community, engage in outreach, and help people grow in their relationship with God. How do we do that while still participating in the in-person dynamic of our churches and not pulling ourselves too thin? So I'm looking forward to hearing about my colleagues as we're going to talk about this, but this is the nature of the mission that we're all called to, and the scriptures are clear that technology is a gift of God, and for us to be able to use it to extend our reach for God's mission and God's commandment to love and love all. So I'm going to pass it back to John and my colleagues, but just something to think about as we start to prime that conversation of how do we embrace a hybrid future and to not burn our ships. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Bryce. That's wonderful. And we're going to move now to Chris. Chris, I'm going to have you introduce yourself. In one of our times together, you addressed issues around generations and how generations engage technology. You had an amazing story, and I'm excited to have you share with us as you talk to us about generations and technology and the challenge and the opportunity that exists in that space. So Chris, introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Christopher, or Chris, Cruz-Osorio. A little bit about myself. I graduated from Northwest Nazarene University with degrees in multicultural leadership and Christian ministry. And currently I'm serving as the pastor of student ministries at the Church of the Nazarene in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And so it's a multi-campus, multicultural church. And I have the honor of pastoring our middle school and our high school young people. And so one of the things that we have to talk a lot about in youth ministry is the ways in which we use technology to build community. And so as we look to build relationships and to share the gospel with younger generations, we have to learn to see and to use technology, and specifically social media and online platforms, as a tool that can help us build a bridge between older generations and younger generations. So in Spanish, we have a word that's sobremesa, and it literally means over the table. It specifically refers to like the fellowship and the conversation that happens around the table after a meal. And so, for example, like in my family, we'll eat dinner together. And after we eat dinner, we bring out el café con leche, pan dulce. So like the coffee with milk and sweet bread. And we continue the conversation. Like we're still at the table. The main event has ended, but we're still talking and we're still telling stories and we're still joking. The fellowship continues. And so imagine this with me. And so it's like you host your youth group or a small group or a life group, whatever kind of discipleship group it may be, and you're having a phenomenal conversation about whatever topic you've decided to discuss that night or that evening or that morning. You know, you've had some snacks, you've had some food, you've played some games. You're having a great time as you delight in each other's fellowship and in each other's presence. And the reality of social media is that it then allows us to continue that conversation, to continue that fellowship after the allotted hour or two that you have with specifically your young people each week, or however often you may meet. It can really extend our time together. And in many conversations and about outreach or ministering to other people, we talk about going to where the people are. So, like if you want to reach this specific neighborhood, we're going to do an event at this specific neighborhood. If you want to reach this specific city, we're going to plant a church in this specific city. If we want to reach a specific country, we're going to send missionaries to that place to reach people. And so if we want to minister to a specific group of people, we have to meet them where they find themselves. And so when it comes to Gen Z specifically and to the upcoming generation, like Gen Alpha, we have to learn to meet them where they already are meeting. And for a whole lot of them, that is on a screen, that is online. Research shows that Gen Z, at least in the United States, that Gen Z spends at least 4 hours on social media, and honestly up to 8 to 9 hours looking at a screen, whether that's on their phones or at school or TVs, whatever that piece of technology could be. And so to minister well, we have to meet them where they are. So let me tell you a story. I serve as the youth pastor at my local church. And one day, I got a text message from one of my students in a group chat. And it was right after dinner. I had just eaten dinner, and it was me alongside other students. And the message said, Roblox ? That's all. If you don't know, Roblox is essentially an online gaming platform that has a collection or a library of games that are made by Roblox themselves or by different users of the platform. And to be honest, just like any other online platform or social media, there's a list of pros and there's a list of cons. But after I got this text message, everyone quickly responded with a strong yes. Honestly, they use words like ye or bet or slay, the terminology Gen Z likes to use, but they all said yes. And so they started a FaceTime call, a video chat. And I was like, I really don't know about this. I really don't want another app on my phone. I really don't want another account or another password to have to keep track of. I just don't want to do this. And so I had decided, I was like, well, it's after dinner. I'm home. I'm just gonna not respond in the group chat. And then one of my young people said, Pastor Chris, are you jumping on? Pastor Chris, are you coming? And I had to decide. And within a quick second, I said, yes, let me download the app. Let me figure out what's happening. And so they waited for me and I joined the video chat. And the 4 young people that were on this video chat, hollered in excitement because they managed to convince their youth pastor to download Roblox and to play a game with them. And so I got on the call knowing nothing about this platform. I made my username and my avatar. And one of the young people on the chats on the call said, Pastor Chris, we have to play the cheese game. And honestly, I was like, the cheese game, surely there has to be more about the game than simply cheese. And so I knew nothing about this. And so I was like, all right, teach me how to play this game. And so these teenagers then spent the next 30 minutes teaching me how to play the cheese game. I don't think that's what the game is actually called, but essentially it's a game where you're looking for different keys to unlock doors in a building that's made of cheese as you're being chased by a huge rat, and you don't want to be caught. You don't want to be caught by the rat. And so once I got the hang of it, they hyped me up. We played, and we had a great time. And every so often to this day, I still get text messages from this group chat saying Roblox ? Or sometimes it just says cheese ? And I've discovered a lot of fun other games on this platform as I spend time in this sobremesa, in this fellowship and conversation with my young people after the main event. And something really changed in my relationship with my young people that night. Something changed because I was willing to sit down for an hour after dinner one night and meet my young people on this online platform to play a game about cheese. And as we were playing this game about cheese, we were able to have really profound conversations. They told me about their days. They asked about my day. They shared about some of the hard things that were happening in their lives. And I was able to share a little insight or a little bit of maybe I've experienced something similar. And we just had a great conversation. We talked about what's happening the rest of the week. We even had faith conversations. We had conversations about what we talked in youth group or what our pastor preached on Sunday morning, or what they've talked about in different small groups. And so and all the while, we were just playing these silly little fun games. My conversations post these game opportunities also changed. I felt myself being able to have deeper conversations with my young people because, one, being online with them gave them an opportunity to see me in a place where I typically wouldn't be for them. They didn't expect their youth pastor to download this game and spend hours over the course of months being present with them on the platform. They didn't expect it, and I didn't have to do it, but I did. The way I built relationship with this particular group taught me the importance of continuing to meet people exactly where they're at. And we're committed, and my youth group, we're committed to find effective ways to connect with our young people online. And of course, there's boundaries that I have to create for myself to protect myself and to protect my time and to protect my energy. And that's needed both in-person ministry and online ministry. Boundaries are good. Boundaries are helpful. For example, I'll tell my young people things like, I will not add you on Snapchat, but I will I'll play games with you on Roblox. Or I'll tell you, you can send me your favorite TikTok videos and I'll send you some of my favorite TikTok videos. You can share your favorite YouTube videos, things like that. And so setting good boundaries is important. And here's the thing about this is that I'm on the older end of Gen Z and I still have to work hard to gain the trust of younger Gen Z. And this is one of the ways that I was able to do that because the reality is that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the upcoming young generations, need godly adults that deeply care for them and advocate for them to exist in spaces where they are existing already. And so as we cheer them on at their soccer games, as we cheer them on at their track meets, as we applaud them at their award ceremonies and at their musicals and at their plays, we meet them where they are, where they like to be, where they enjoy to be. Being online gives us that same opportunity. It gives us the opportunity to meet our young people where they like to be, where they enjoy to be, where they're honestly spending a lot of their time at. It gives us it grants us the ability to continue conversations, to continue to disciple after our in-person spaces of connections have ended. And so at this point in my relationship with the young people, I've been here a little under 3 years, and They send me their favorite TikTok videos and I send them my favorite TikTok videos. They send me their favorite Instagram reels and posts and I send them mine. They show me YouTube videos that they really like that I don't think are funny. But then I show them videos that I think are funny and they really don't think are funny. They try to find me or my parents on Facebook so they can see my baby pictures. And so there's all these different moments of connection that are happening after the main event of in-person connection has ended. The conversation continues and the mission of making Christ-like discipleship can continue, can happen in these online spaces. But it means that we as leaders have to put in the work. We have to realize that the tool we have available is an opportunity to meet our young people right where they find themselves. And it doesn't mean you have to understand how it works completely. Because just like how my young people taught me how to use Roblox, I'm sure you may find young people that are willing to teach you how to use the platforms they're already on. You don't have to know the latest trends or the most recent language usage, as long as you're available and present in the same space that they are. If we as leaders are not willing to see how of a blessing and opportunity this is, we are going to miss out on the good things that God is and wants to do through online platforms. In my experience, it's been true for many of my friends in ministry to young people, being intentionally online can fuel a relational connection between us and our young people. And it's not the only thing, of course. And really, I believe that as Gen Z and Gen Alpha continue to grow, it's going to be really important for us to make ourselves available online, for us to be relatable and intentionally present for a generation that doesn't completely trust us just yet. We can give and the amazing thing about this is that we can give our young people an opportunity to lead. Our young people know what it's like to be physical and what it's like to be digital. We can give them the opportunity to teach us, to lead us, to guide us into the present and into the future of the church. We have this really unique opportunity to disciple not just our young people, but all our people through and on an online platform. And the reality we have to keep in mind is that if the church isn't discipling our people online, other organizations and other people and other worldviews are and will continue to. When I started my segment, I talked about this reality that in Spanish we have this word called sobremesa, right? This idea that the conversation and the fellowship and the delighting in each other's presence continues after the main event has concluded. The younger generations are truly teaching us that this can continue into online spaces as well. That as we leave in-person fellowship after the main event, that fellowship and that conversation can truly continue to be real and authentic because of online spaces. And truly my prayer for the church and my hope for the church is that may we start and may we continue to use online spaces like social media as a tool of discipleship and as a tool of sobremesa, this reality that we're called to be united in community, in person and online. And so with that, I'm going to send it back to John, who will be continuing us in our time here together.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love the story. I love the way that communicates so much. Christopher, thank you for your sharing that. Sarah, we're going to turn to you, and I want you to talk to us about media and technology and sharing the hope of Jesus in that space, and talk to us about the challenge and opportunity of doing that by using technology.
All right, my name is Sarah Kinzer, and I'm the Director of Generational Ministries at the Church of the Nazarene in Harrisonburg, Virginia. It is a joy to be here with you today. And I just want to share this that super encourages me. We're talking about bridging the divide between on and offline. And as I join you, I am sitting with all of you online, except for I am also in the same room as Chris is. And so you can see we've got a shared background here, but also As I look in our participants, in the list of participants, there are 2 Martinezes that have joined us today. One, I have spent 99% of our friendship with online and had the opportunity to meet in person. And the other, I spend 99% of our friendship, our relationship in person, and we are together online today. And so it just blesses my heart to see that bridge happening even in this training today. So recently, very recently, I was reading a little bit about John Wesley and came across this journal entry from after the first time he preached outside of the confines of the pulpit. And he says, "At 4 p.m, I submitted to be more vile and proclaimed in the highways the glad tidings of salvation." So I just wanted to congratulate you for being one of many who are willing to follow Wesley's lead and step outside of a traditional pulpit to be more vile, as it were, so that the glad tidings of salvation might be heard along the newest highways that God has opened for us. Social media has already crossed the divide, and people engage on social media in ways that impact them in their real lives. They have their hearts and their minds shaped in ways that influence their choices offline. Many of our people spend most of their lives with one foot in the digital world and one foot in the physical world. If you don't believe me, think of all the times you've seen other people, not you, other people scrolling on their phone while they're driving. So I recognize that there are some things that might be a little scary about social media. It is addictive. That is in its nature. We are fed little bits of dopamine as if we are Pavlov's dogs, with these likes as the treats and the notifications are the bell. We are being conditioned by this tool, and social media is divisive, can be divisive. It is in its nature. We are fed little bits of intrigue that we follow, like breadcrumbs, until we look up and realize that people we love have followed different breadcrumbs in completely different directions, and we can't find each other anymore. I'm also aware of the impacts that it's had on our culture, our anxiety rates, and the way we communicate or don't communicate. So with these kind of negatives, it can feel like the message of hope won't be heard. You've probably heard many reasons to abandon social media, but there are many more reasons to stay. Like Bryce pointed out, social media is a tool and tools are neutral, but like he also pointed out, their usage has risk. A hammer that you use to drive a nail can smash your thumb. And a book that you read that can give you knowledge can also give you a paper cut. And a car that can take you to church you can also end up in a wreck. But we don't abandon a tool because it has inherent risk or danger. We learn to use it properly. We tailor the circumstance where it may be appropriately used. We place warning labels on it so others can be safe. We create restrictions and licenses so that we may regulate its use in our society, and we raise our children to use the tool safely. It is the responsibility of the people using the tools of the society and the society governing its usage to set appropriate boundaries and train her people how to use tools well. If we want to be set apart, let us be set apart by recognizing that our culture is using social media as a weapon, and let us do like Isaiah suggests, beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. If not us, the people of God, filled with the Spirit who produces God's peace, then who? If you are ready to be a force for God online, to spread hope and to bring glory to his name, there are several things you must do. So first, make the commitment. If you are going to use your platform as a pulpit, be aware that the mic is always on. So what you say matters. What you repost matters. What you like matters. And if you don't believe me, nobody wants to think back to 2020, but we're gonna. People left churches over seeing their pastors and their leaders liking posts that they found offensive or hurtful. What feels like a quick like, a quick click of a button, can have real harmful impact on relationships, both on and offline. This means if you truly want to use technology to communicate the hope of Jesus Christ, you have to self-limit using technology to communicate that which does not bring glory to God. It's not hard to identify that social media gets used for venting or winning arguments. If your goal is to win hearts for Christ, then you must let go of your right to be right. Each post, each reply, each affirmation should be as carefully considered as if you were speaking those messages directly into the mic on a Sunday morning in front of not just your congregation, but in front of everyone that you've ever hoped would come to church. Make the commitment. Be committed to posting more thoughtfully. Be committed to admitting if you get something wrong or need to apologize. Be committed to treating your online spaces like a pulpit. Second, we need to study up. There is access to infinite amounts of information online. If you're going to add to the noise, make sure you know what you're saying. It is more important than ever that we equip ourselves with sound doctrine and theology. It is so easy to not challenge yourself mentally these days. We don't have to remember phone numbers. We don't have to know how to use the Dewey Decimal System. We can just look on YouTube for anything we need to figure out. And you can get just enough knowledge to do damage. What we believe and what we preach cannot be an area that we know just enough about. We have good, rich theology. We have beautiful doctrine, particularly where we can speak about sanctification and Christian holiness. We've got to know what we're talking about, or else we will lead people astray as we are guessing at what things might mean. We should be more devoted to the study of the word, by which I mean not just reading and meditating on it, but seeking to understand the context and culture surrounding what we're reading. We should rely more on the filters of reason, experience, and tradition than we've ever have. And we should be prepared to answer questions or prepared to follow up with the promise to go and find out an answer for a person. We need to be able to discern truth from lies, which, because so much truth right now is defined by consensus, that which is considered true shifts from trend to trend. Our doctrine and theology cannot shift so easily. It is important to have a spirit of discernment, but if you seek to communicate the hope of Christ online, then you must also equip yourself with other tools of discernment. Thirdly, embrace the via media. One of the most beautiful parts of our Wesleyan heritage and the most freeing parts of our Nazarene doctrine is that we leave space for a messy middle. We do not, for example, prescribe a how-to guide for the second coming. Rather, we say that we believe that Jesus is coming back just as surely as we believe he came in the first place, and that he will come how and when he chooses. The reason social media is so divisive is that it presses people to take stands and it rewards extremes. How often have we seen people standing on business and about to fall off the cliff into an extreme view? The way to rescue those people from that moment is not to scream one side or the other at them. It is to urge them to step away from that cliff and closer to the Lord. It is okay for people to disagree. Our tradition supports this. Allow yourself to allow others to have different conclusions on the non-essentials than you, and be lavish with compassion, particularly where people are still being drawn to Christ. The greatest of these is love, not rightness. In the essentials, unity. In the non-essentials, liberty. But in all things, love. Know yourself. Post as yourself. There is no reason to try to emulate some other account or personality that seems to be successful. That voice is already out there. God gave you your voice, so use the voice that God gave you. If you are a prayer warrior, take prayer requests. If you are an artist, post your art. If written word is your forte, develop your writing to suit the platform that you prefer. If you are a comedian, be funny. If you have a heart for a certain people group or a certain cause, bring attention to those needs and how support can be given. If you want to encourage people to bring Christ into their daily lives, then open a window into your daily life. And finally, know your tool. Each platform you use has an algorithm and has good and bad times to post. Each platform rewards certain types of posts more than others. Platforms introduce new features, which they will push. So staying current, understanding your understanding of your preferred platform is vital. And all of this information can be found and is constantly updated through a fairly simple Google search, just with the name of your platform that you prefer and popular posting times or current trends. So I just want to end with a bit of encouragement. I don't believe that you would be here if you didn't have a true desire to communicate the hope of Christ and to do so faithfully. So I want to honor that desire in you and encourage you. You're probably familiar with the story of Elijah, who, suffering from a deep discouragement, heads out to the wilderness. There, an angel comes to tend to him, feeds him, helps him rest, and directs him towards an encounter with God. Elijah continues up to the mountain, and there, when the Lord passes by and asks him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah replies, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king of Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him." The task of communicating hope, the hope of Christ, online can feel daunting. It can feel like, as Elijah said, "I'm the only one left, and they're trying to kill me too." You might think that the enemy is too big and that people are too divisive and that the fight is too hard. But if you look around, if you look at the list of participants, I'm so encouraged because you are not alone. There are people here who also want to communicate Christ to the broken, the lost, the hopeless, and the hurting. Make the commitment, study up, embrace the via media, know yourself and know your tools, and step out in faith, trusting the Lord, trusting his leading, surrendering to his way, and relying on the Spirit to go before you as you follow him, preparing the hearts and minds of those who will encounter the gospel online. Thanks, John.
Sarah, thank you. I appreciate all that you shared in the spirit and heart with what you shared it. And so thank you very much. We're going to keep rolling forward. I'm going to pause for just 1 second to remind you, if you have a question, feel free to type that into the Q&A. We'll take some questions toward the end. And then also, just want you to know, when you do leave the webinar, and some of you may well need to leave now, we understand that some of you are on a lunch break or on time commitments. We are going to continue. Feel free to leave if you must. That is okay. There is a survey, and that survey has a question in it. If you want to be added to the list, we'll communicate with you when the course by these individuals are complete. And then also give us your feedback. We're listening to you through this webinar as well while we create that course. And so your feedback becomes really important to us. And so I would encourage you just to take some time to do that. I'm going to move now to you, Lindsey. I'm going to let you introduce yourself as well as we have done with the rhythm of all the others, and talk to us about pushing content and connection and what that looks like. So I'm going to let you take it from here. Thank you, Lindsey.
Thank you. Well, so my name is Lindsey Murphy, and I'm an evangelist and a pastor. And when I jumped into this world, it was the year that a lot of us don't like to talk about, and that's that 2020 year. I got a phone call, and the phone call said, "Listen, I don't want to be online. I never wanted to be online, but the Holy Spirit has gripped my heart, and now I need a pastor to do it." And so what that looked like for me was jumping head first into trying to understand a world that I didn't really understand. In fact, I even said to this pastor, listen, you may think I'm young, but I'm not as young as I may look. I don't know all these pieces. And when he said back to me, this idea that at the end of the day, as long as you love people, we can figure the other parts out. That's so true here. When we gather in person in a building, we want to be loving. And our time online doesn't look that different. I want to take us back to that place for a minute. For those of you that maybe you turned that camera on and you got the soundboard and you got the mixers and you did all the things, and you're feeling over the course of the last several years like, what did we get ourselves into? What are we supposed to do? Or maybe the question I asked often, where did everybody go? Because you can sit online and you can think to yourself, where is everybody? That early process of development. So if you're watching now or later and you're in that early place of development, you did the first step. You said, listen, I want to reach the people that are in my community in a 30-mile radius. Maybe I want to reach everyone or anyone that I can. Then you've done the first right thing. But we've got to take the next step. See, over the last several years, part of my job as an evangelist is going into different places. I get to see how all the different unique churches function in their digital spaces. And I love it because I get to learn what you all are doing. And sometimes, yes, I'm a former educator, and we all know, like, don't recreate, just take what other people are doing and learn. And I hope you're doing the same thing today. So here's the deal, right? I jumped in, and within a few months, we were putting all this effort into trying to connect with people, but it was crickets on the other line. Where did they all go? Maybe you're looking at the views, you're seeing people jump in, but they're not saying anything to you. Well, the first thing I want you to know is you got to be patient. So patient. Here's the deal. When you're in the digital space, the other person is in control, not you. They get the opportunity to make themselves known when they're ready to be known. What the Lord spoke to me in that particular piece was the power that once they make themselves known, they're ready. So you have to be ready. My colleagues here have shared about the ways in which you and I need to be ready. We need to be prayed up. We need to understand and gain our knowledge. But here's the deal about this too. I realize that if we're only turning our cameras on Sunday, then we're missing an opportunity to develop the relationship that's so necessary for us being able to share the gospel. So what does it look like beyond that? Well, the first thing I realized is that we have to have champions. That's what they call it in the churches that I'm affiliated with. Instead of volunteers, we call them champions. People who are just as passionate as you are about the people they're reaching. You know, they maybe give of their time and they want to extend in that. So the first thing we had to do when we started going live, when we started turning those cameras on, is we needed chat hosts. I want to give you some really practical things you can do if you're in the early stages. You did the first right step, you turned the cameras on. You got the equipment, you're mic'd up, the lights are working for you. That's great. But now what? Get chat hosts. People who are going to talk with those that join you. And not just say amen and hallelujah, because here's what I learned about that conversation. There's nothing for them to say back to you. You have to ask them questions. What I loved about this process was that we would actually share the pastoral manuscript. And in the manuscript throughout the week, we could develop questions, reasons, giving people reasons to engage in conversation with you. The other thing we started to add was influencers, right? We know that word from culture. Well, what would happen if we started to encourage those people who join us regularly every single Sunday to say, listen, will you share this with somebody? You know, we want them to share things. They're going to share the kitty cat videos. They're going to share content. How great would it be if they got to share a message of hope with the people around them? This is just your chat host paying attention to those who have joined and asking them that simple question: would you like to be an influencer of hope? So we added influencers, but that still is limited to this Sunday expression. So what can you do throughout the week? That was the burning question in my heart in 2020. How can we connect with people throughout the week? Developing relationships with them. You've heard my colleagues talk about the different ways in which they use social media to develop relationships. My example is not much different. We launched Facebook groups, a space that's already designed for community around a passion that I had. So I told you I used to be a high school English teacher. And as we know, in the forgotten year of 2020, here we were stuck at home teaching our children. And I can assure you that teaching 150 ninth graders was easier than teaching my 2 children. But I realized that if I feel this way and I have a background in education, what do other parents feel like right now? Do they also feel overwhelmed? So I went to the platform that's already created for community and started a group and began to pray about who might want to join my group. As Sarah talked about, if we watch our feed, we start to see what people are passionate about, what they're talking about. And as I began to pray, the Lord showed me people who were also struggling in this, I went from parent to teacher overnight. And I began to share my group with them. We created a space then where people could come in and then get the encouragement, offer tips and tricks. But then also, right, as the Lord led me, I began to share different pieces of that particular, of the gospel, of the good news with those that needed that encouragement. You may have caught on that in the process of all of this, if you're starting from scratch, you're starting the cameras on, and what are we doing? I want to encourage you to know that you have to be prayerful. Every decision you make should be bathed in prayer. The last thing I want to share with you is if you're thinking, well, how do I know what to do? These are all really good things. One of the very practical steps that we took, as here I was currently at that time stationed in Michigan. I was in Michigan and the church was in Ohio. I'm now in Alabama and the church is still in Ohio. Is how do we create a space that feels like and engages and disciples people? So we literally took side by side, you want real practical terms, side by side, we listed all the things we do in a physical church. And then we began to dream about all the ways we could replicate that in the digital world. And guess what? It doesn't take as much money as people think it does, because a lot of these platforms are free. And you will find that there are ways. Chat hosts are your greeters. Think about it. You station people at doors. You put them at your coffee. You put them at each pew. It's no different when they're chatting with people online. Think about what you do in your in-person church that you love so much that you would want other people to experience. And be patient. Here's what we learned at our church, is that by the time people walked through the doors, if in fact they were local and they walked through those doors, they actually already thought they knew us, even though we didn't know their faces. They had been watching us for months. They'd gotten to know each of the pastors, the chat hosts. We eventually added live hosts, people who chat with people in real time. And by the time they walked in, they were already sold out to the community and ready to be embedded in it. So I want to encourage you that as you step into this world, for my friends who have taken the first right step of turning the camera on, and maybe they just don't know what to do next, because where did the people go? They're just not talking anymore. Or maybe you're like me and your grandma pops on and says hi every once in a while. Don't quit. Be patient. Find your champions, people who love people and want them to know who Jesus is. And then give them the space in the digital realm to connect with those around you. There are so many different ways in which God began to present himself in the digital world that I didn't even realize until somebody offered me the opportunity to join them. Sometimes you and I just have to extend the invitation to join. It's scary. I was scared. But there's so many things out there that you can use to learn that'll help you engage with other people, that there's no reason just to have a camera on. Those are real people with real hopes and dreams, real pains and burdens. And just like you and me, they want to be seen. They want to be heard. So I would just encourage you today that if you're at the beginning, don't give up. Be very patient. It is, in fact, one of the fruit of the Spirit, after all. All right, John, I'll take it back to you.
Thank you, Lindsey. We're so grateful for everything you shared, and we're going to keep the ball rolling. So we're going to keep moving, and Elaine is going to talk to us now about what it looks like to care for people in a digital space. And Elaine, I'm going to let you again introduce yourself to us and take it from here. And then after this, so everyone knows what to expect, we are going to take some time for Q&A. So Elaine, share with us a little bit.
Thank you, John. And thank you, everybody who's spoken so far. Oh my gosh, tons and tons of information. And as you've watched in the chat, you've gotten a lot of accolades for all this information that you've shared. So I'm coming in last. I'm Pastor Elaine. I actually host online programs for Christian leaders to overcome self-doubt and imposter syndrome and speak professionally. And so because I'm last and we're over time, everybody needs to like stretch and breathe and know that we're almost done. Okay. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm an ordained pastor. And I went from having people in a room at my church doing therapy to actually going completely online. And now I do 6 hours every week of Zooms with Christian leaders from Australia to Europe. And so I've had a lot of practice, but I actually started doing therapy online about 12 years ago because I had moved from one location and my client wanted to stay with me. So we started doing Skype. And being a therapist, I know the value of being in a room with somebody and seeing their body language and their tone and just kind of watching where they sit, how they sit. And we used to even have an exercise where we would bring people into a room and then a family into a room and then watch where everybody sat and who sat next to who and how. So very, very high value of being in person. And the challenge is what do we do online in that regard? And when John first asked me to cover this topic, it was embarrassing. The first thing that came to mind was this incident that happened with one of my students. And so I'm going to share it. So I had a student that English is her second language, and I didn't know her at all. And I'm in Northern California and she's in Southern California. And so I knew that when I talked to her, and I'm sorry for the translators if I'm talking too fast, but when I talked to her, I needed to slow down and I needed to think about what I was saying and not use like super high psychological terminology and, talk like a normal person. And, but what happened, and I didn't realize this was happening, is that in my head, I was thinking, okay, talk like maybe at 10-year-old language. So then I started perceiving our communication at a 10-year-old language, which means I started treating her in that same vein, because I would slow down and I would check, are you getting this? Are you sure? And, but I didn't realize I was doing that until one day, she explained to me who her dad was, and he has a church of thousands in Mexico. And I'm like, wait, that's your dad? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, and what do you do? And I found out she translates and designs all of the ordination materials for the Southwest region of our denomination. And she was in the middle of her doctorate program. And I'm like, man, this lady is much brighter than I am. And I literally had zero idea. I had zero idea. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you guys that are watching is, how long have you been in your current position? Just wherever you're at right now, how long have you been at? So type it in the chat if you can. So whether it's been days, months, or years, how long have you been in your current position? So 1 year, 16 months, 1 year, 4.5 years, 15 years, almost 3 years, 4 years, 10 months, 7 years. Very good. Very good. And so I want to ask you another question. What is your favorite food? Your favorite food. So mine is pizza. I hate to admit it. 3 years, roti, meat, Chinese pizza, tacos, nice, strawberries, curry. Oh my gosh. Great job. Can I come over for dinner? Anybody want to invite me over? So as you can see, just by asking questions, and that's really kind of what our last speaker talked about, right? Is as asking questions. And I don't know if you realize this, but most of us go to YouTube looking for the answer to a question. How do I change the radiator in my car? How do I A, B, C, or D? And the entire platform is designed to answer questions for people. And as we learn how to ask questions so for this, everybody has a favorite food. So they can all answer. Everybody who's in ministry can all answer the question. And it's being able to engage in questions that everybody can answer. So as time went by, I got to know Pastoral Loida much better. We've gotten to meet several times, and I even apologized to her because I'm sure it had to have come across that I was speaking to her in less than intelligent a manner, but I had no idea. And so for you to really talk about your own tendency, or think about your own possible tendencies of being judgmental and not even being aware of it, right? Stepping back and saying, okay, how do I perceive this person? One of the things in therapy that I did was I realized that I'd have a client coming in, and I was like so excited to meet them. And I had this other client coming in. I'm like, oh, I have to see him again. And one day I thought, why do I do that? What is different about this person than that person? And what is my role from this person? My role was identical for each person. So as you bring people into your community online, ask yourself, why are you connecting with certain people over other people? And really kind of try to be introspective about that as you're teaching people. It can be really enlightening. So I have another student that I invited to a leadership conference. So I bought a bunch of tickets and I gave them away as prizes in one of my events. And so I gave her a ticket to this leadership conference, and I was at the front door, and it was like, there's thousands of people, and it's an international conference. And I got to the front door, and she's texting me, where are you? Where are you? And I'm trying to explain to her, go in the main door, blah, 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 over here. And I'm just looking and I'm looking and I'm looking. And she goes, I'm right here. And she's literally 1.5 feet shorter than me. And I looked down and I'm like, oh, and I gave her a big hug, and I'm like, I had no idea. I had no idea, because on social media, we all can sit and look the exact same size, right? So some people sit back really far. One of my students did that. She sits back really far and she looks really tiny. And when I did I had a conference for Women Rocking Ministry, and she was my MC, and I met her after she got off the plane, and she's taller than me. And it was just shocking. So there's so many things that you don't necessarily pick up on, but to be aware of that, and then even ask the question, how tall are you? Right? I mean, we could type that in the chat. How tall are you? Just to get to know, and not be embarrassed to ask. I think as leaders, it's interesting to me, as I've listened to other leaders, that they're afraid to ask certain questions. People like to be known. They like to know that their value is high enough that you would take the time to get to know them. And if they're having a struggle, you can back channel them as well, right? You don't have to necessarily do it in front of other people. but take the time to really get to know them individually. And so I wanted to read a little bit of this. So like I said before, there's limited ability to read body language and nonverbal cues. It's difficult to gauge participation, especially those who have a tendency to go off screen or turn their camera off. I've gotten to the place where I've done this long enough to where I can tell when people are multitasking because you can tell. And there is a potential for anonymity, but again, based on what it is that you're doing, there was one, and I don't know that I'd recommend this, but one particular organization that I participated in, they said, if you have your camera off, we're going to put you in the waiting room. And that was to help people to come in and turn their cameras on. That's kind of an aggressive way to do it. So I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend it, but there are ways around it. One of the things that, asking questions is great, but one of the things that John does, and he's done this for most of the times that I've been able to speak for him, is he uses polls. Polls are a really great way to learn about your people, but he puts a poll in the application process when you register for his, and not everybody answers, but then you know who's coming and who's attending. And so you can even do a poll about, have you ever read the book of John? Or how much have you read the book of John? Or how long has it been since you've read the book of John? And put that in a poll as you're inviting people to your next event. And they also have quizzes. You can do discussion forums, like making a Facebook group specifically for like your Wednesday night service. If you're doing Wednesday night service, you can have a Facebook group just for Wednesday night service where you can have ongoing conversation there as well. And the other thing that is very fun is doing icebreakers. So just like everybody could watch the chat right now and see what their favorite food is, you can actually. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm supposed to slow down. Yeah, you can you can do icebreakers and ask questions just that are fun to let people know each other. So there's using online polls, quizzes, and discussion forums, and then incorporate icebreaker activities at the beginning, and of course encouraging them to use their cameras, and then following up. Do follow up with email or chat or video conferencing. I do have a lot of people that ask me, can I meet with you? And I'm like, sure. We'll set up a time and just follow up, but be available. And I think if any of you have heard of Bob Goff, that's his biggest thing. He always preaches, be available, which is why he put his phone number in the back of all of his books. So those are some of the ideas that will help you bridge that gap of not knowing deeply the people that you're with. You can make it fun. You can make so I was going to do this. So this is something I do. Anytime anybody makes progress in any way, like we just finished this time together, we blow bubbles. So it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. If you've made progress of any kind in our class, we will blow bubbles for each other. And somebody will actually stop and say, hey, doesn't that deserve bubbles? And like, oh yeah, everybody gets their bubbles out. I'm going to blow bubbles for each other. So again, you can make it fun, get to know each other a little bit more, learn how to ask creative questions. And I think that you will actually enjoy the time getting to know the people that you may never have met face to face. All right, John, thank you so much.
Thank you, Elaine. And we're going to switch to a time of questions. There are some questions in the Q&A, and if you do have questions that haven't been asked and you'd like to ask it, feel free to do so. We are going to jump right in, and I'm going to take a real easy question and I'm going to answer it. And the question is, will it be possible to have the recording of this webinar? And the answer is yes. Everyone will receive a link to the recording within 24 to 48 hours of this live event. So watch your email. Make sure you check your spam or junk mail folder, as it can go in there as well. So let's start, and I'm gonna bring Christopher into this. Someone is asking, how can we reach young people besides Roblox?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. The first thing I would say that comes to mind is find out what online spaces your young people are using and go there. And so, for example, we've done prayer videos done by our leaders on social media during seasons like Lent. We've posted them and invited our young people to pray with us. Instagram has, this is what we use Instagram a lot in our context, but Instagram has a tool on their story that allows you to ask a question and people can respond to you and you can interact with those questions. And so I've done things like I've posted at the end of the week, asking a question, what's the best thing that's happened this week? And as our young people respond, I'll respond back to them on our story, whether that's a video or a picture. And if it's something more serious, I'll send them a private message to them directly. We also sometimes make like funny videos to promote our events and our activities. And with that wave, it's like we're also intentionally moving away from using our social media just like a bulletin board where we only post promo for events. We're also just posting pictures and videos of our youth group, of who we are as we tell the story of what God is doing in and through our young people. Some of the things that I'm not doing, but I know some of my friends in ministry to young people are doing is they've created spaces on platforms like Discord or groups on Be Real, or some are using like Zoom or Teams to do like weekly or monthly intentional Bible studies. Some go like, hey, like every Tuesday night at 8 p.m., I'm going to be live on Instagram. If you have any questions about anything, just hop on. And so those are just some of the different opportunities there.
Thank you, Chris. I have a question for you off of this, and it kind of ties into some of the other questions that I'm seeing here in relation to content. When it comes to the generations you're speaking about, does it need to be professionally created content like videos, or is the unplugged feel to that? I mean, the authentic. Talk to me a little bit about that, if you know what I'm asking there. Do they need professionally done content to be able to engage?
No, it can be a simple video taken on your phone, using your selfie camera. It can be a simple, using someone else's phone. So it can be really, really simple video forms that you can use to just engage with people. So it doesn't have to be over complex. It doesn't have to be not every single detail has to be perfect, to say it like that. Young people want something that's authentic. And so when they've noticed, like this person is trying and they're being authentic, they'll engage and they'll connect with that.
Very good. Thank you. I'm going to throw this question out. It's a good question, and I'm just going to throw it out to the panel. So anyone that wants to respond, maybe you can raise your hand digitally and if you want, or however you want to do that. But how can I create boundaries on social media? I know that was talked about. What does that look like? Maybe share what that looks like in your life, if you want to be vulnerable in that space, and how that's gone well, maybe some areas that you're working on. What have you done in that space?
Well, I could say in terms of boundaries, just like a church building has office hours, you need to create office hours. So when we first launched into the social media space, the issue wasn't necessarily the content that was being posted in terms of boundaries. It was just the availability. Online never turns off. And so you have to have a very natural, if you struggle with rhythm in your life, that's something you want to work through before you launch into some of these digital platforms. And you want to have an accountability in that so people are watching it, because it's very easy to the person who's maybe in a different time zone, or just the night person, and they want to reach out to you, but it's your bedtime. And you hear your phone going off. And as pastors, we can go, oh, but they need me. And so some of that is an identity crisis. You got to be careful. And so you want to be checking that with the Holy Spirit. But I really simply, I gave myself office hours. Now, my office hours look different than my colleagues that were in a building, but I needed to do that for my own mental well-being, to say, listen, I turn off at this point. And then I let people know that, so that people also knew. Because remember, they're only pushing the boundary that you've allowed them to open. So if you start answering them at all hours of the day, well, then they're only doing what you taught them to do. And so I also made sure that my spouse knew that I had these, so he could put me in check if I was getting on my phone and be like, hey, And then, of course, the pastors that I worked alongside. So and I know there's two ways to look at that boundary question. Some of it is just boundaries in terms of content, but boundaries in terms of time is how I dealt with that.
Anyone else want to speak to that?
I think there are different boundaries, like she suggested. I think another important thing to think about is just to self-evaluate and say, where am I boundaryless? And where are there areas of my life that might need more protection? And so you might look at your platforms and the way you're engaging with those platforms, and what might be okay for one platform would not be okay for another. For instance, I'm on Twitter, and on Twitter, I put almost nothing about my children on Twitter because it is very public there. And on Facebook, I have a more closed account, and because I post things about my kids there. And so I draw a boundary around spaces where I have young people in my care to protect. I also think I follow, we all know the conviction of the Spirit. And so if there is something that is popping up for you that says, I think that maybe this is pressing me further than I should be going, and be aware, be aware of those checks of the Spirit. If you find yourself in conversations with people that it would just be wiser that they be public conversations, then take those conversations public. And if those conversations, if the people are adverse to being taken public, then I would invite them either, if they are available, to be taken into in-person experiences with the conversation, or involve a third party, just so that there is accountability.
Thank you, Sarah. Very, very helpful. There's a question here. Timothy is asking, I'm just going to read what Timothy has written. Discipleship online has challenges in demand of time for answering questions and developing relationships. I see the young people willing to do the time, but maybe not having the experience to answer and to connect. How do we merge the wisdom and experience of our spiritually mature adults and the digital ability of the young people? So in some ways, I think it sounds like a way of bringing those two generations together in a discipleship relationship through the means of a digital space. So anyone want to address that? I'm throwing it out. I know that anyone can jump in.
So there has to be value from the top down. If the value is set that all people matter, so the generations that have the spiritual maturity have a desire then to connect with those that have the technical wisdom, although I don't want to separate those two too much, because we can have young that are spiritually mature and have the technical wisdom. But I think it's a vision that's cast from the top down, that all people matter. And therefore, we want to work intergenerationally amongst each other. We see each other as gifted people from Christ, and we want to work in that gifting. And so that partnership is super important. It's that champion who finds another champion to work alongside. It's not my ministry, it's God's. And therefore, who does he have for me to work alongside? But I think it's a vision that's cast from the top down, not the reverse.
Thank you, Lindsey. Anyone else?
Yeah, something that comes to mind is, like, if you're doing Instagram lives, you can bring on speakers, and anytime that you do interviews with people. So if you have a following in any particular platform, you can bring speakers on and just make them short. I think that's the one thing that people don't know how to do, is make them super short. They call it target worthy. You have to be able to listen to it, get in and out of target, right? Nice and short. But being able to bring people on, because if you have the young people and you say, hey, I've got this person and here's their experience, you might want, and that you can relate it. Again, it's that buy-in. What is the buy-in for someone to actually listen to somebody who's older? They have to know that it's relevant to them. And that's a very tricky thing that a lot of people in ministry don't know how to do, is to make the buy-in evident, the benefit for them to actually listen to it.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. Bryce, you unmuted.
Yeah, I just to say something super practical. I would say leverage the often ignored generations of Gen X and your older millennials, who can kind of bridge the gap a little bit. Like, actually, there's a whole army of people in that weird phase, because, like, oh, to be fair, millennials are like in their early 40s now. So, and the Gen X who can kind of figure out some technology stuff, that there actually is a piece of a middle generation that actually could be leveraged to help bridge a little bit of that gap.
Excellent.
One thing that came to mind, and I've tried to work on this, is to help the elderly use social media and be content creators and not just consumers. And they get nervous about that. And I tell them, just post your favorite Bible verse for the day. Just put something out there. And once they get used to putting stuff out there, but a lot of them are really just consumers, and helping them understand the benefit that people do want to hear what they have to say. And getting them over that idea of I'm old and I'm no longer valuable.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm gonna got a couple more questions, 2 or 3. I'm gonna take, and then we'll try to close things off here. So I'm just gonna read this as well. This comes from Terry. I hear much of this is streaming content or social media presence. I believe the next wave we have to commit to is creating online content that people can download and watch on their time and at their speed. Are you creating such advice to create this kind of content? Best practices, how to create it, make it available, and create meaningful content. And I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. That might be also just more for us to consider as we think about creating the content of the course as well. But does anyone want to speak to that? Anything resonate in that maybe would be helpful for Terry as you heard that?
I would say that one of the best practices that I try to lean into when I'm creating content is to be genuine. When I am creating content that represents my church, I'm not going to create content that does not represent my church. So when people come and see us, they're not surprised. They think that we look a certain way, that we dress a certain way, that we act a certain way, and from what we've put out there. And then they arrive and they find out that, in fact, I mean, we are very cool and very attractive people here at our church, but we want to present ourselves as ourselves, because I think that we have an obligation to honor the image of God in one another and who God has put us together as. And so whether you are representing your local church or whether you are representing yourself online, to honor the image of God in you and in those around you. And so be very genuine. Do your best to create a piece of content that is easily able to be consumed by the person consuming the content, but to be honest and genuine in what you're delivering.
I would just add to that we actually took for our YouTube, the platform, we took all of our services and cut them down to just the messages, changed the title. And then you create playlists, right? So you're not necessarily bringing an entire service with your greeting and your coffee break and your announcements and all of those things. You're just reducing down, and now you've got a bank of content. We actually spent the time of turning all of our sermons into questions, because YouTube is functioned on how to. Well, then you turn those into how to. How do I read the Bible? Who is, all these kinds of things in order to generate content later on that was produced on a Sunday.
Thank you, Lindsey. Here's a question. Is it an assumption that just because someone chooses to be or participate online, they want to be unknown, or they want to be known? Is that an assumption, and how do you navigate that? There's probably people that like online because of the anonymity that they feel as well, I would assume. So anyone want to respond to that?
I use the online space actually for my entire ministry. So everything that I do is online. So the only way that you could access what I do is online. So it has nothing to do with anonymity in that regard. So I would say no.
And so in this space, some people, though, are you kind of gauging? I mean, don't want to necessarily draw people out that aren't ready to be drawn out. I think it's kind of the idea, and knowing the wisdom in that as well. Sarah, I saw you unmute.
I think there are some people who do and some people who don't. My first reaction to that was like, that is an assumption. I don't agree with it. But I did then think about how Nicodemus came at night, you know, he was stepping in to ask questions with a cover so that he could come and feel safe about it. And there are people who come to engage with church in a way that that covering helps them feel safe. And so I think that all you can do is you can offer the open hand, like you are welcome to come when you are ready. And when you are, until you are ready to step into whatever relationship you're comfortable with, like we're available, we're ready, and we're willing to be in relationship with you.
Yeah, I would echo that and say, like, I think it's the same as in person. Like people come to church anonymously all the time. You see them, but like you don't ask for people's ID when they come in. They come fairly anonymously. I go to churches sometimes to visit. We wouldn't demand that somebody give you their information. You ask for it. That's a way to like engage. It's the same online. You can ask, but not to push. And maybe a good way to see it. That's just good hospitality, I think. And it's probably less different online and in person as maybe we think.
And perhaps the not being known part is for them to spend enough time in online presence in a community to know if it's safe to be known. And so part of that isn't necessarily that they don't want to be known, but it could also be they're waiting and watching how interactions work to know, do I want to accept the invitation to be known? And that can take some time as well. So very good. Monty, we have one more question that looks like it's in perhaps Spanish. And I don't know if you want to interpret that and ask that. That'd be
It
great.
just says, one of my responsibilities is to keep people united in prayer. Many times the prayer requests come very late at night and they need to be acted on at the moment. And how can I act on those kind of requests and not be limited only for the daytime? So really, you know, if you're online, you can be getting requests all day, all night long. How can this person be able to stay current and respond even in the middle of the night?
Thank you. Anyone want to respond to that? And by the way, some people are thinking, where did Monty come from? Monty's been here the whole time. You just didn't know. He's been in the background. He hasn't been wanted to be known, and we just made him be known. Thanks, Monty. I just realized I called you out. You're like, Monty is our NDI regional person in the Mesoamerica region. And so we're really glad to have him and his region participating with us in this. And so for those that just wondered, like, where did all of a sudden Monty come from? That's where he came from. So thank you. He's in Guatemala right now.
If
Anyone
it's
want to
possible in your context to have a team of people who field those prayer requests, that might be of use to have someone who I know we have people who worship online with us who are across the world and in different time zones. And so they will be awake, you know, when we're not, and they'll have needs when our need feels like sleep. And so if you can have a team built, and if you can have people who are in the same time zone, if that is why there's the gap. I think that's one way to address that.
Awesome.
And I'm pretty do the same thing about setting office hours, and it's just necessary, and that doesn't mean that I don't care. Sometimes I'll turn off my read notifications, so they don't know that I read it, but I can still read and pray for them and have the knowledge without necessarily engaging with the person, which I know sounds really, I don't know how it sounds, but anyway, sometimes that's just the way in order to manage things so that the situation is known, right, and being taken care of, but I don't necessarily have to go into deep engagement.
Elaine, you just said something that made me really think that it might be really important to remember turning off the read notification so people don't think they're being ignored. And that just takes a little small step, but it communicates really, really significantly. And this is not an expectation to be placed on anyone, but it's just an observation from a church that I got to spend some time with some leaders. The head of their digital department said, and this was now understand in context, this is a church with a huge staff, but quite frankly, they have volunteers, and most of the stuff they do is through volunteers in a network globally. And so it's not even their staff that is doing a lot of this, but this, the head of their digital said their goal is to respond to every email within an hour and any Facebook comment within 10 minutes. And the reason they said that is so important is it says, we see you, we know you're there, and you matter. Because the longer it goes, the more it communicates that you don't matter. And in digital, it's just a different realm. And so, again, can everyone do that? Probably not. Yet there's things that we can do to help mitigate when those responses can't be done, to help us set things. And I think, as already said, communicating those times that you are available. And I think most people can respect that if you can make that known. So you set that for yourself. And then also those people that are sending those texts or whatever somehow have a way of knowing, oh, yes, I'm not going to be expecting a response immediately. Because I think there is an expectation digitally for us a lot of times to think you should get a response immediately. And it's just not always doable in every context. And so just thinking about those steps to help mitigate those expectations relationally in the digital space can be very helpful. Everyone, there's some more questions. I'm cognizant of the time. We have gone way over, and those of you that have stuck with us, you are saints, and we thank you for staying with us. And we appreciate every moment that you've invested together with us. And I think I speak for all of us to say this has been good for all of us. And truly, we've had a conversation as we've gone through these questions with you, getting to know you, and you're helping us. Lindsey, Elaine, Bryce, Christopher, Sarah, thank you for your time. And we're going to be meeting briefly together. And so your feedback as you leave on the survey becomes really important. Again, as a team, we're going to meet here just real quick after this webinar, in fact, to even discuss what we're learning from you in this space as we create the course. So with that, we will let everyone go. We're grateful for you. Thank you for taking time to invest in the kingdom of God through this webinar. And we appreciate you and love you. Blessings to you.
Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this production and wish to hear more, visit holinesstoday.org/podcast or find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.